This is Scientist Virtual Networking event that we do on Fridays usually, and we just to give an introduction to people in the community and different workshops and topics that are of interest. And yeah, thank you so much. In terms of my own background, I have a research background in stem cell research and histamine as well. So I've just finished my research at Durham University in the UK.
Thank you, Hassan. I'm Jennifer. I'm the event coordinator and scientist, and I'm a microbial genomicist. I'm from Lebanon, and I graduated with a master's degree, and I'm currently trying to find a PhD. Callum should have been here with us. He is the one to work on mainly on this event. Unfortunately, he wasn't able to be here today. Hassan gave a bit of an introduction about scientists, and I'm gonna be adding the link to the scientist website. So you can, if you want to create an account, it's a community of scientists and people who are helping each other and supporting each other. So you can create a free account and join us. Also, I will be adding the link to our Twitter, so you will be updated with our next events for 2021. We are organizing amazing events for 2021. Today, we're talking about a very interesting topic, which is the imposter syndrome. I will not be giving any introductions. We have specialists here in the topic. And I'm going to give the floor to Drs. Valerie Young and Drs. Emily Billick to introduce themselves before I start asking questions for them so they can discuss and talk to us about imposter syndrome. So thank you first, Drs. Valerie and Emily, for taking the time to be with us today. And thank you everyone for joining us. Please, can you introduce yourselves? If you, in any order.
Why don't you go ahead, Emily?
All right. So my name is Emily Billick, and I am a clinical psychologist here in the United States. I work at the University of Michigan. And I have, my job is a little bit varied. I do see patients of my own. I also do a lot of supervision of trainees who are learning to become clinical psychologists, or I also work with in a multidisciplinary environment. So I also work with psychiatry trainees, as well as social work trainees, and people who are, early career clinicians. And then I am also involved in research here at the University of Michigan, mostly looking at effective therapeutic interventions. So usually cognitive behavioral therapy for youth typically with anxiety or OCD. So mostly my work and my research is with youth, although I have a lot of training and experience with adults as well. And in terms of imposter syndrome, I have given a number of talks on imposter syndrome throughout my career and during my training back in the day. It's something very close, I'm sure we'll talk about today, it's very closely tied with anxiety disorders and just anxiety symptoms in general. So it's a nice fit with my research and my clinical interests as well.
Thank you.
Yes, and my name is Valerie Young, and many years ago, I did my doctoral dissertation on women's self-limiting attitudes and behaviors that might kind of lead people to feel like imposters. And let me be clear, a lot of men feel like imposters. This was back when it was originally thought this was a phenomena that just affected women, and very quickly determined that a lot of men also have these imposter feelings. So I've been speaking about this and writing about this for about 30 years now. I speak to a variety of different organizations, from Google to Boeing to Merck, Microsoft, over 100 universities, including University of Michigan a couple of times, MIT, Stanford, Oxford, and so on. So as you can see, it cuts across a lot of different industries and a lot of different fields as well. And about 2011, I wrote a book with Random House that's now in 6 languages. And I say that because I want you to also understand that it's also a very international experience. It's not just unique clearly to the United States. So I'm very excited to be here.
Thank you so much for being with us today. Before I start asking the questions, I want to ask the participants to introduce themselves in the chat box. If you have any links to your favorite social media account, ResearchGate, Scientist, Twitter, LinkedIn, please please add them to the chat box so you can add each other and communicate with each other. And I will add the link to the scientist again and the Twitter so you can follow us and create an account if you want. So I'm going to start asking doctors Valerie and Emily the first question. What is the definition of an imposter syndrome? What is, many people know the concept, many people don't. So what is the definition? What is imposter syndrome? And what are the key factors that drive people to think that they are imposters in their field? So you can answer in any order you want also.
Sure. Well, Emily, you might define this differently, you know, coming from a psychology background. I usually describe it as this, well, first of all, it's not a syndrome. The correct title is imposter phenomenon. Dr. Pauline Clance and Dr. Suzanne Imes, two psychologists who coined the term in 1978. And it basically describes this experience whereby despite evidence of our abilities, evidence of our accomplishments, a lot of people have this internal sense that they're somehow fooled other people into thinking they're more capable, competent, talented, qualified than they really are. And they do that by externalizing their accomplishments to things like luck, timing, computer error, you know, personality, that kind of thing. And so there's this underlying fear that sooner or later you're going to be found out being an imposter, fake, or fraud. And there's lots of reasons for it, but let's just stick with the definition for a minute. So Emily, what would you add or refute about that?
No, I agree. Yeah, I think fraud is a word that resonates with a lot of people, feeling like you're, like you just said, like you're about to be found out, that your accomplishments, I like that, are due to luck. Or I think some people almost think that their accomplishments are only due to their sense of imposter syndrome. Like I have to be so hard on myself and see myself as a fraud, because if I'm not almost always looking out over my back, someone then will catch me. And that's the only reason I've had success, is because I have been so vigilant about the fact that I am a fraud. And so sometimes I think there can be, maybe this is diving a little bit into your next question, but this sense that you are defining your self-worth as very highly connected to your success. And if I am not successful, then who am I? And I think then that can actually lead people to be very vulnerable to things like feeling like a fraud or an imposter, because we will all have experience of making mistakes or having setbacks. And then if we're so hypervigilant to those setbacks that they mean that we're not successful in our careers or as humans, then it can mean that we feel like frauds, because we all will have setbacks and struggles. So I think of them as tied, both of this internal sense that I am a fraud, and also that in order to be a worthwhile human, I have to be successful.
Yeah, and I would add to that in terms of the sources, because that's the other question you had, Jennifer, was it where do these feelings come from?
Yes, exactly.
I kind of frame this as perfectly good reasons why you might feel like a fraud. So part of it might be family messages growing up. Maybe you came home with 4 A's and 1 B, and your family's only response was, "What's that B doing there?" So you learned that the only thing that was acceptable was perfection. Or maybe you didn't get praise. You came home with very good grades. Or maybe you got way too much praise. I mean, I could give you literally 100 different versions of family messaging, but there's more going on than parenting. We don't exist in a vacuum. We know, for example, that people in certain fields are more susceptible. People in creative fields, people in STEM. People in especially STEM, where no human could ever keep up, where it's rapidly changing and very information dense. Organizational culture can play a role, which is why there's so many people in universities who feel like imposters, because you're surrounded by highly educated people. I think it was actually University of Michigan where someone said to me, "This is crazy. I shouldn't feel like an imposter. I have a PhD." I said, "No, you feel like an imposter because you have a PhD." Right now, people are looking at you a certain way. Oh, you must be smart. They have expectations of you. So being a student also all by itself leaves you more susceptible to imposter syndrome. People working alone, and then there's a whole larger conversation, which is the intersection between diversity and inclusion and imposter syndrome. So I went through those different ways because I think it's important that we kind of normalize these feelings. And I think one way to do that is to do less personalizing, less psychologizing, and more contextualizing. so that you can look around and go, well, of course I feel this way. Why wouldn't I? I'm in a university, I'm in a STEM field, and maybe the first generation of my family to go to university, etc.
Yeah, and I was going to bounce off the comment you made about diversity and inclusion. I do think that it's especially relevant to talk about populations who have been historically either minorities in a certain field or marginalized. And you were talking, Valerie, about the messages we get, right? And certainly the messages we get from our parents go a long way to shape the types of messages that we give ourselves down the road about
Right.
success or accomplishments. But certainly there are often unquantifiable messages that we get from society. So for instance, it's very hard, at least historically, to find Black women represented in science industries in popular culture and media. And that is a more subtle message that we're getting about who belongs. We can also get more overt messages, but that are indirect, right? That someone, early in my career, when I was thinking about even going to graduate school, I got messages that, I wouldn't belong there before someone had looked at my credentials even, right? So what are the expectations that we have of what a scientist looks like? And how does that fuel who gets positive reinforcement for pursuing that? And certainly that can lead to self-doubt or to, internalized messages that we don't belong or that we are a fraud. And I think that's definitely, I think your point, Valerie, about different fields are going to have different subcultures, and then that's going to lead to different groups of people feeling as if maybe they don't belong, and that can certainly fuel some of these imposter feelings as well.
Yeah, these are great points, and I personally relate to this because throughout applying now for a PhD, just applying for a PhD, all the rejections I'm getting, I start having the feelings that if I get accepted somewhere, it's gonna be by chance, not because I'm worthy of being accepted there, because of the rejections I've been getting. And I totally relate to the ideas that you've been saying.
Yeah, Jennifer, I'm curious, are you applying in Lebanon or internationally?
No, internationally.
I just want to mention that because another, that global sense of belonging fosters confidence, right? And so when you look around, the less people fewer people who look like you or maybe sound like you. Let's say if whether the language of the school is not your first language, or you have a strong kind of working class accent, the less confident you're going to feel. So when I speak at universities, I can tell you that the largest group to show up are the international students, which makes perfect sense, right? Because they get the same pressures everyone else has, but you're doing it in another culture and often in another language at the same time. Or if you are the first generation to go to to go to university. In other words, whenever you're on the receiving end of stereotypes, as Emily said about competence and intelligence, you're more susceptible. And if there's fewer of you, or you're the only one, or the first at a certain level, there's that additional pressure to represent, right? You have to be super disabled person, right? Or super woman or whatever it might be, because now you represent your entire group. And that just compounds, all the imposter feelings as well.
Yes, exactly. And I feel like a lot of people, especially international students, can relate to what I'm saying and what you are saying about this topic. So that's why I mentioned it. I'm gonna start with our first poll. I don't know if Hassan is able to execute it, or I ask it in the chat box. Hassan, are you able to execute the poll?
No, I think we can just ask the question and then people can just what they think can just write in the chat maybe.
Yes, I will write the first question in the chat. Feel free to answer it. And I will mention something also. If you have any questions, if we have time, we're gonna have a small Q&A session with our panelists. So if you have any questions, I will try to monitor the chat box as much as I can, ask the questions, and we will ask them at the end. So after the first point, I'm going to ask the second questions. What are the possible approaches to overcome these ideas or to prevent them from the beginning? Is there a way to prevent them? And if they happen, how can a person overcome the ideas and move on?
Yeah, I can take a stab at that question if you want. I would say it's probably unrealistic to expect that you can prevent feelings of insecurity or inadequacy completely in your life, right? I think working with anxiety, I always tell people first and foremost that anxiety has an important role to play in our lives. And, it would be wrong of me to try and take away all of your anxiety, because sometimes it can be helpful and certainly it's not dangerous, right? It's how we respond to anxiety that matters. And I think the same is true about the sense of feeling like an imposter or a fraud, that I think it's pretty normal to have feelings like that at some point in your life. And, as Valerie was saying, depending on your circumstances, that may be especially expected in your situation. I think there are definitely things we can do to respond to those feelings that are more or less helpful. Less helpful, it's probably important to point out first, I think the less helpful things we do are when we respond to feelings of insecurity or inadequacy, or respond to a misstep or a setback, which again, everyone's going to have. So Jennifer, I hope you don't mind me responding to what you said before. It's actually, and I don't know your specific subfield, but it's actually very common to get more rejections than acceptances to graduate school. In my field, the acceptance rate is so tiny. And the first year that I applied for graduate school, I didn't get accepted anywhere. And then I applied again. And the way that we interpret that setback really is going to determine whether that is a growth experience or something that holds us back longer. And I think it's easy when we're coming through the lens of, I'm a failure, or, especially, or if you don't have as many models for how it should go, to determine it as I'm a failure. And that can lead to feelings of shame. And typically we find that people respond to feelings of shame with avoidance. Shame feels real bad because shame is the feeling that I'm a bad person. And it's, for most people, a feeling that they're trying to avoid most of their lives. It's not something that tends to lead to growth. It usually leads to withdrawal. And so if we have overwhelming feelings of shame, if we respond to a setback with a lot of shame, it can lead to withdrawal. It can lead to not seeking opportunities, or it sort of depends on the specific situation. But if we're applying for graduate school, it could lead to, saying, okay, I didn't get anywhere this year, I'm never going to reapply because it's something bad about me. Versus if we respond to that same setback with some insecurity, totally normal and natural, and then a reflection of, well, what are the facts here? This is actually quite normal to not get in, or maybe this is showing me some areas where I can grow, right? And not equating that setback with my self-worth. It doesn't mean that I'm a bad person or undeserving. It just means that either I have some ways to improve, or, it was an unlucky go this time around. Then we're much more likely to lean towards the problem and look at what can I do to improve. And then we're much more likely to actually improve, put more time on the task, and have it go well in the future. So I guess that's, in a nutshell, I would say that when we feel insecure, we can either respond by doubling down on shame, which is probably going to lead to a self-fulfilling prophecy, because then we disengage or give up on opportunities, versus leaning in and saying, this is actually not about me and my self-worth. It's related to a lot of factors, and some of which I can potentially improve, and then lead forward and hopefully make the situation better and grow.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree with absolutely everything that you just said. And people are often looking for a cure, just give me the magic pill to make all the pain go away and kind of flip the switch. And for me, it's not about curing imposter syndrome. If that happens, that's great. But it's about having the information and insight and tools so that when you have what I consider a very normal imposter moment, you can talk yourself down faster. Right. And so one way we normalize it, one of the tools is to normalize by doing what I said earlier, like kind of hitting the pause button, looking around and going, well, what are the situational or organizational factors that might have led me here? Does it make sense that I would have these feelings? I wrote a blog post called Unpacking Michelle Obama's Imposter Syndrome, which kind of addresses, that need to do more contextualizing. Like, how could she not feel like an imposter was basically the point that I made. The other way to normalize is to recognize that the common statistic that's thrown around all the time is that 70% of people, achievers, have had these feelings at one time. or another. And certainly it's higher in some fields. There was a study in the UK that found that CEOs, 80% of CEOs said they sometimes felt out of their depth and that they're struggling in their role. So again, very normal. So but let's just stick with 70%. So if it's 70%, that begs the question, what's going on with the other 30? Like, why aren't we studying them, right? There are hundreds of dissertations on imposter syndrome. Well, some part of that 30 has a whole different problem going on, irrational self-confidence syndrome. Their confidence level far exceeds their actual competence. But then there's another part of that 30 that I think we can learn from. These are people who are humble, but they have just genuinely never felt these imposter feelings. And that's important because even though we look at people and they seem very confident, so we think they must be competent, or they don't feel like imposters, the only difference really between them and us is in the exact same situation where we might feel like an imposter, they're thinking different thoughts. That's it. And that's good news because it means we can learn to think like them. And it's not a matter of kind of motivational pep talk, right? You've got this, Jennifer, and you can do this, Hassan, and you deserve to be here, all of which is true, but it's not going to move the needle in any lasting way. What I found, years ago in my original doctoral research, and is just run through today to be true, is that people who don't feel like imposters think differently about three specific things: competence and what it means to be competent. Because people who feel like imposters, as Emily said, they experience shame, right? And that's because we hold ourselves to these unrealistic, unsustainable expectations about what it means to be competent. They think differently about competence. They think differently and respond differently to failure, mistakes, and criticism. And Emily gave you a great example around reframing, that experience of getting rejected. And they see and they respond differently to fear. So the first tool is to normalize, and the second tool is to reframe. So when you're having that normal imposter thought, again, step back, hit the pause button, and then say, how would somebody who is humble but doesn't feel like an imposter, how would they think differently about that exact same situation? So instead of walking out of a class or a meeting and going, I'm so stupid, right? Which we've all said that before. Instead to say, I felt so stupid. Huge difference, right? We all feel stupid. As a matter of fact, if you don't feel stupid in the next 24, 48 hours, I'm scared for you because it means you're probably not learning anything. If you get an assignment or a promotion that feels, beyond you and it's big, the imposter thinks, oh my God, I have no idea what I'm doing. The person who doesn't feel like an imposter says, wow, I'm really going to learn a lot. Or they think, I've never done this before, but I can figure it out. I'll ask, Patricia, or I'll ask Madeline, or I'll, pick up the phone, and I have a PhD in Google, right? I can figure it out. So it's a matter of kind of normalizing, reframing, and then to keep going. Some people, they kind of wait until they feel more confident before they stretch and do things. And you have to kind of do the thing first, right? Change your thoughts, then change your behavior. Don't wait till you feel like you're 100% ready. And over time, the feelings will catch up. In other words, feelings are the last to change. So don't focus on the feeling part, focus on the thoughts and the behaviors.
This is amazing. Thank you so much for your ideas. And I have one interesting something in the chat box. When I asked, have you ever felt like an imposter? Someone said, when I'm working alone, not really. When I stepped in the lab meeting, yes, it was. Which is something that I think a lot of people experience, that when they're surrounded by people and surrounded by others who give, and one said about the conferences. And yes, I guess this is a very important thing. I don't know if you can talk about it more, the people in conferences, how they feel about being imposters.
Yeah, just to echo something that Valerie was just saying, which is that it's again totally normal to feel that way, especially if you are new to that conference or you're new to your field. One thing that I've found just personally from going to conferences is that there is just a curve that you follow when you're new to doing anything that is important to you. At first, it's all going to be awe-inspiring. Which can be interpreted as I don't belong here, right? But I think Valerie's point of, can you reframe that a little bit to be, I have so much to learn. This is so exciting. So much of this matters to me, right? What I think is one positive way to reframe imposter feelings is, wow, this must matter. This must matter a lot to me, because otherwise I wouldn't care so much, right? And so then being able to say, like, you know, also, I am the intended target of this conference then. If I'm here and feeling in awe of all these people and all of the important research or talks or whatever, that means that I am actually the most important attendee here, because you know who those conferences are not for? The people who are bored because they've gone so many times, they've heard all the talks that are there, and they're just there to go sort of be a celebrity and, you know, I don't know. I'm just thinking about my field. I don't know what your fields are like, but in my field, it does feel like that sometimes. When I first started going to those, it seemed like the conferences were really there for the big mucky mucks, but really it's not. It's there for the people who are so excited by the content that it actually feels scary because maybe I don't belong here. So that's one way to reframe it is, can I reframe my fear about this situation is actually excitement and feeling in awe of everything I have to learn.
Yeah, and especially at a conference, I think, you know, part of the anxiety is because you're surrounded by people who know more than you do. And guess what? There will always be people who know more than you do. There will be people who know less than you do. So somebody said to me once, aren't you worried when you give a talk that there might be somebody in the audience who knows more than you? I said, no, why would I care? Wouldn't that be great? Wouldn't I learn something from somebody who knew something that I don't know? Because, you know, thinking that you can know everything is the equivalent of trying to get to the end of the internet, right? It is simply not possible. And people might posture, you know, and act like they know more than they do. I'm trying to think of her name, Martha Beck. She went to Harvard University getting her PhD in psychology. And she wrote a book, and in it, she talked about throughout her academic career feeling like an imposter. And then one day something happened that changed everything. She was in psychology and she was heading off to class. And on the way, she stopped off in a friend's lab, and the friend was doing an experiment with these rats that were swimming in a little kiddie pool. And you know the Smurf cartoon characters, the little blue Smurf cartoons? Well, they were on the kiddie pool. So she goes, oh gosh, I'm late. I've got to go to class. She rushes off. The professor says, Martha, I didn't think you were coming today. She said, I'm so sorry. I got hung up in the psych lab watching the rats swim in the Smurf pool. To which the professor replies, yes, I believe I've heard about that. How is Smurf's work going? And then another student said, yes, I believe I read Smurf's latest paper. And she said, oh my God, you know, they were like just making this crap up. They didn't know it. There is no Smurf. It's a cartoon character. They were like BSing, right? And she said, I suddenly realized after 7 years at Harvard, I wasn't the only one faking it. She said, I'd gone to many cocktail party and pretended to know the latest theory or theorist of the day. She said, I finally realized, she said, I wondered how I had managed to survive among the staggeringly intelligent people lurking around me. Now I was beginning to understand. So it's a long way of saying, don't assume everyone around you knows what they're talking about. The more educated you are, the better you are at BSing, which has actually been established.
That's a really amazing story. And related to the conferences, I went to a conference for 5 days. The first 2 days, I was like, what am I doing here? How am I going to be a PhD candidate? How am I going to have my own lab? And that's impossible. Everyone knows much more than me, and they have all these amazing ideas, and I'm just like collecting some bacteria and looking at them. After that, I started thinking, no, I want to be there. I want to be there one day and be at their place and giving the talks. And this, I reframed the idea of me not being able to achieve that into, no, I will be able to achieve that one day. If not today, maybe in 5-6 years. And that's totally fine. So like, thank you so much for.
No, that's great, because everybody used to be where you were. Everybody is where they are on this path.
Yes. And I'm going to ask the second question for the polls for everyone. And in the meantime, I will be asking my last question before moving on to if anyone has any questions, you can type them. Someone is asking, what is the name of the book? I don't know what, if you can answer them about the book.
I'm not sure which book.
I'm not sure also. So if you can please.
Sure. I could tell you my book is called The Secret Thoughts of Successful Women. Why capable people suffer from imposter syndrome and how to thrive in spite of it. So it's the secret thoughts of the secret thoughts of successful women. And I hate the title because it leaves men out, one, but also a lot of people look at it and they go, oh, successful women. You think it means the president of a country or of a university, or, where it could be your first year at university, or someone starting a business, or an artist, right? So I don't like that title for that reason. If it's Martha Beck's book, I think it's called Raising Adam, because she became pregnant while she was at the university and her child had Down syndrome. So it's called Raising Adam.
Oh, okay, thank you. And so my last question would be, how disabling is imposter phenomenon? How disabling for the person who feels this?
How disabling is it? Is that the question? Okay.
Yes.
Emily, what do you find in your experience?
Oh, yeah, I think it's like anything, it falls on a spectrum would be my, answer. I think it like we've been saying, everyone is likely to experience I guess not everyone, Valerie, to your point, there are 30% of people who maybe don't, but many of us will experience these feelings from time to time. And many people are not disabled by them. I think, it's all about, as Valerie said, as I alluded to before, it's all about how you respond to those thoughts. So certainly can run, the spectrum from being an errant thought that you have from time to time. That is sort of, I think I mentioned with OCD a lot, and OCD is characterized by intrusive thoughts, but actually all of us have intrusive thoughts from time to time. There was a research study that showed 97% of people have unwanted, scary thoughts that really don't make sense. And that could be something as simple as you're driving on the highway and you get the thought, I could just open the door right now, right? But how do you respond to that thought? If you don't have OCD, you might get a little freaked out, but you probably just keep on driving, or you might think that was a weird thought and you keep on driving. And I think imposter syndrome is similar. How do you respond to that thought? Do you respond to that thought by thinking, you have the thought of like, I don't belong here, or someone's going to figure me out, right? You can respond to that thought as like, oh, that's weird that I thought that, and just reorient to what you're doing. Or it could be a little bit more concerning, right? And it could be like, oh, I hate when I have that thought. It really makes me feel like I don't belong. But I can also respond to that thought by using one of Valerie's techniques, right? By reframing, what would someone without imposter syndrome think in this situation? Or I could change my behavior and say, oh, that's a reminder that I actually need to do this thing because it must matter to me a lot. And then certainly we can fall on the further end of the spectrum of it being debilitating, right? And when those thoughts come up, we respond by avoiding the situation, by starting to believe that it's true, by doubling down in that sort of cycle of thinking. And then it can be debilitating. It can lead to things like downshifting in your career, which means, you don't take on opportunities because you hate that feeling of being an imposter. If you only do what you know, then you're probably not going to climb the ladder, right? You're just going to be stuck, or maybe take on fewer opportunities and maybe end up, falling down the ladder a little bit. So yeah, I guess my answer to that is it can really run the gamut. What matters is how you respond to the thoughts that probably will come up for you.
Yeah, absolutely. There are people who, it is just a mild kind of passing feeling and they continue with their career, whether it's Tom Hanks or Viola Davis or Maya Angelou or, many other very famous actors and actresses and writers who've talked about their own imposter syndrome. And then there's people who do harm to themselves, and then there's people who, who it is, a serious kind of issue. And we do respond differently. For some people, as Emily said, they downshift, or I refer to it as kind of flying under the radar. So they don't speak up in meetings. They don't ask questions in class. They don't go for more challenging opportunities or assignments because it's safer, right? That no one will find out if they keep their head down. Or they might chronically procrastinate. You know, when I was supposed to be writing my dissertation, I had the cleanest house in Northampton, Massachusetts, and it has never been that clean ever again since. Or they might never start or finish, and far too many people drop out of university, don't finish their degree, or they sabotage they job hop, they may be alcohol or substance abuse, showing up late to an important meeting or presentation or not preparing. Or I think one strategy, and many of these are coping mechanisms that Clance and Imes, the two psychologists who coined the term imposter syndrome, talked about, is overworking and over preparing, right? So you're trying to outrun the no talent police by studying harder, working harder than everyone else, not out of good old fashioned hard work. We all have to work hard, but it's coming from this place of, I have to work harder and study harder than everyone else because I'm not as intelligent. That's the message that you tell yourself. So all of those strategies work. They do the job. They protect us from humiliation, disappointment, failure. You know, if I work crazy hard, I'm probably going to be successful. So it's a hard habit to break. But all of those coping mechanisms come at a price. Right? We pay a price for our protection. So, you know, what opportunities and experiences are you going to miss out on? You know, it could be burnout. It could be losing out on valuable learning opportunities. There's a financial cost to all of those, and not just to yourself, but also to your organization. The organizational cost to imposter syndrome as well. So even if you don't personally feel this way, if you manage, mentor, lead, teach, parent other people, you need to understand imposter syndrome so you can help them to address it as well. And can I just say one more thing? At the beginning, I forgot the question, and I thought, oh, well, this would be a good learning, moment, teachable moment, because a lot of us wouldn't want to say, I forgot the question. And then I kind of figured it out as we're going, oh yeah, that was a question. But we've all been in a meeting or a class and we didn't understand, but we don't want to raise our hand because we don't want to sound stupid, right? And then someone asks our question and they go, oh, but the brilliant question. You're like, oh no, that was my question. I say that because I want you to not know with confidence, right? I want you to be coming from this place of recognizing I'm entitled to not understand, ask a question, be confused. So I want you to confidently be the person who raises their hand and say, excuse me, I don't, could you put that another way? I'm not following. Could you say more about that? Acknowledging if you are, let's say there's not a lot of women in the room, or you're a person of color, you've got a disability or whatever it might be, it is riskier for you to be the person to raise your hand and say you don't understand. But none of us can control what anyone thinks of us. We can only control our response.
Exactly. And I'm talking about a lot of my experiences because I can relate to this. When I started teaching undergraduate classes, I had many students who didn't want to ask questions. And later I discovered that they didn't understand the idea when we have private meetings. So I made sure to ask,
right,
to mention during the first session that you are allowed and you have to ask any questions, no matter how stupid you think it is. It might not be stupid. And I was actually surprised by the amount of questions I was receiving during the sessions, because I told students that you are not stupid. You can ask any question you want, and it's a valid question, because if you don't understand, that's totally fine. You are not supposed to understand from the first time. So
right, they're supposed to not know.
Yes. So
I was speaking at Stanford, and this PhD student said, I feel like I should already know what I came here to learn. And when he said it out loud, everybody's like, you realize when you say something like out loud, like it makes no sense. You're here to learn. You're paying money to learn.
Yes,
exactly. So ask questions.
Yes, exactly. I want to, someone asked to share your Twitter accounts, if that's okay with you, Doctors Valerie and Emily.
It's just Valerie Young.
Okay.
I got a lot of light coming in this window. I'm going to shut my curtain here.
Yeah, and I can put mine in the chat. It's just my first and last name, PhD, so Emily Billick.
So I got the links. So these are the Twitter
Okay, got it. Great. Thank you.
And I'm gonna now ask the questions from two of our participants. The first one asked how to identify if any friend is suffering with imposter syndrome.
If a friend is?
Yeah. I was just gonna say, I think it's great to just talk about it. I think I think a big point that we've been making here today is that one intervention in itself is normalizing it. So people may feel very alone. And I do think that that's another danger of imposter syndrome, is if you feel like a fraud and you don't want anyone to find you out, it makes you withdraw within yourself, become more private. You don't want even your friends to know that you're an imposter and a fraud. And so if you have a concern about a friend of yours, normalizing this, sharing a time when you felt that way is going to help them realize that they're not alone. It's going to also make them feel a lot less afraid to share their own thoughts and feelings about it. I think that that would be my approach, is just being much more open about it, destigmatizing it, because it's just so natural. There's nothing wrong with feeling that way.
Yeah, I agree. Just talk about it. But in that normalizing, you're not confessing. You're not saying, oh my God, I felt like an imposter. You're going, wow, I felt like a huge imposter at that conference. And people go, oh, have you heard of imposter syndrome? And they go, no, I've never heard of it. And you say, wow, some of the brightest people on the planet feel that way. You never did? Odd. No, you would never do that. but to talk about it, there could be posters, you could have a book up, but to Emily's point, especially if you're somebody who, people look up to, for you to talk about your imposter feelings. I think when Michelle Obama talked about her imposter feelings, it gave a lot of people permission, to talk about theirs and to not feel shame and to realize lots of good reasons why people have these feelings.
Exactly. And a follow-up question on this one, someone asked that if they have a highly accomplished friend developing an imposter syndrome and start thinking that they are a complete fraud, how to help those friends to better their situation?
I would say the same recommendations I'm making for you as an individual or for an organization, to normalize, reframe, and keep going regardless. Apply those with your friend, to give them other reframes. And maybe this will help too, is sometimes I use humor, right? So if 70% of people have had these feelings, you have to kind of break it to the person that you're not special. That a lot of people, some of the brightest, most accomplished people on the planet have these feelings. So why wouldn't you?
I also think we can fall into the, understandable, but a little bit of a trap of just providing a lot of reassurance. So if your friend is highly accomplished, it might be tempted to be like, no, of course you're not a fraud. Look at all of your accomplishments.
Yeah.
But I think that that's missing the point, which is that we all feel this way. So it's sort of either regardless of the fact of we're successful or not, or sometimes because we're successful, right? Because we've started to equate our self-worth with being successful. So now it feels much more tenuous. But I also think that it can get into this unsustainable relationship of always having to reassure them. And then that can actually put tension on a friendship. And instead, we want to change that relationship to be about, well, your feelings are kind of separate from your success. Everyone feels this way. And again, I feel like I'm sounding like a broken record a little bit. What matters is how we relate to that feeling when it happens. Do we respond by sort of like believing that it's true and sort of catastrophizing and going down that worry rabbit hole? Or do we say like, oh, hey, that's just the most natural feeling in the world? Of course you feel that way if you're successful. Me telling you all your accomplishments, it's not going to help. Instead, let's find a way to like feel this way and still do the things that matter to you.
Right. Absolutely. And talking about it is a really important first step, but I always tell people it's just the first step, because some people get mired in that and just spent years and literally decades talking about what imposters they are and how incompetent they are and how they're going to be found out. I was speaking at a conference at a medical school at University of Pittsburgh, and a researcher came up to me, a psychologist, who said that they were studying adolescents who co-ruminate. In other words, who dwell on negative thoughts and feelings with their friends. And the adolescents who co-ruminated actually experienced higher levels of anxiety and depression. And females mostly co-ruminate with other people because how we get support is by talking it through. Men, and we're generalizing, right? But men are more likely to kind of distract themselves and compartmentalize. But they found that the young men who co-ruminated, dwelled on negative thoughts and feelings, also had higher levels of anxiety and depression. So, sometimes with my friends, we'll talk about how fat we feel, but we never feel any thinner at the end of that conversation. So you can talk about it, a little bit, but then you have to actually start doing something about it. And I just want to give you one final thing to think about is that this is not all about you. When I was procrastinating on finishing my dissertation, I had about 600 pages worth of transcribed interviews that I now had to make sense of and create this model and figure it out. And I was procrastinating. And my friend Rita wrote me a letter and said, Valerie, you have to finish because you're learning things that could help a lot of people. And I remember thinking, oh my God, how selfish am I? Like, people are waiting for me. I have to hurry. And I found that motivating to get out of my own way by thinking about what are the consequences to other people, whether it's my family or my coworkers or the larger community or your country or whoever that might be, that everybody loses when bright people play small.
Yes, exactly. And one last question before we conclude our event. I know that you talked about a lot about how to overcome the feelings, but I have one last question. Is there anything different for an international student or anything more for an international student to do to not feel like an imposter, other than the things that we talked about earlier?
Well, I wouldn't make the goal not feeling like an imposter, first of all, because you're setting yourself up,
Yes.
right? But when you're an international student, find other international students because you have a shared experience. So other people you can talk to. And if there's, every university has a international students, office and activities. It's harder now with COVID, but those people are there. And then there's organizations, if you can't find them. On Saturday, I gave a talk for this new organization for African scientists, PhD students from Africa. And many are in Africa, but many are spread around the world at different universities. And this is a way for them to find community and connection and to talk about that shared experience.
Yeah, I think to the same point, if I were to leave everyone with like one main point today, it would be to try not to avoid feelings, right? So I think there was another question in the chat about like how to grow like a confident person, and how to prevent, imposter syndrome from taking root, for sure, right? And I think when we try to avoid our feelings, whether it is anxiety or worry or shame or feeling like an imposter, whatever feeling it is that's coming up, you can be successful in the moment. You can, like Valerie said, you can use substances, you can distract, you can procrastinate, or on the other hand, right, over prepare. All of those things tend to be, strategies to get away from a feeling. Those will probably help you in the short term get away from that feeling, but that bill always comes due. We can't avoid our feelings, and that's when the impairment happens. And I think people who feel confident don't have fewer feelings than the rest of us. They just notice those feelings when they come up, whether it's insecurity, shame, whatever, and they acknowledge it, and then they keep going, right? When we try and push those feelings away and make that mean something about us, bad or good, right? If we start to over-identify with our feelings too, that I think is where we run into trouble. So I guess the more that we can start to notice emotions when they come up, acknowledge and accept them, and still do the thing that matters to us, not let the emotions dictate our behavior or our thoughts. I think that's where we can build confidence. Like, I'm a person who knows how they feel. And I'm a person who knows what they value, and I do that anyway. I think that's a lot of what confidence is for a lot of people. Certainly not the absence of feelings of insecurity.
Thank you so much for your answers. It's almost time for us to conclude. I want to thank you all. I want first to thank Drs. Valerie and Dr. Emily for being with us, for taking the time to join us today. And I want to thank everyone who joined us today to listen to the last event of 2020. It's been a really rough year for everyone, and I hope that 2021 would be much better. And I also posted again the Twitter account and the scientist account for you to follow us for more events about 2021. And I don't know if Hassan has any other comments before we conclude.
Yeah, just thank you from me as well, for to both Dr. Valerie and yeah, Jennifer as well, and the panel and all the participants. Emily as well. Just yeah, this is the last event, but we have some few more lined up for the new year, so just keep an eye out. And also the recording of this event will be on the platform itself for everyone who missed out or want to share with their friends, if they find it helpful. Again, thank you so much.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank
and
you.
Nice evening, and have a nice holidays.
Yes, Happy New Year,
Thank
everyone.
you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.